Another important term that you have to understand is angle between two vectors. Many times we say that there are two vectors A and B and theta is the angle between the two. Then which angle we're talking about? For this to know, suppose we have a vector A in this direction and there is another vector B in this direction, and suppose this vector is at an angle say 60 degree with the y-axis. The vector A is along x-axis. Suppose it is our coordinate system, axis x-axis, and this is our y-axis, and this vector B makes an angle 60 degree with the y-axis. And suppose there is another vector which is C directed like this, and it makes an angle, say this angle is 70 degree with the negative x axis. So if I ask you that what is the angle between A and B, for this to know you have to move these two vectors so that their tails are kept at the same location. Suppose we move the vector A to this location and then move the vector B so that its tail is at the same location where the tail of A. And we know that vector B is at an angle 60 degree with the y. This angle is 60 degree. So angle between the two vectors means the angle which is less than 180, because while measuring angle between A and B, we can say that this one is one angle and here it is another angle. So angle which is less than 180 degree is referred as the angle between the vector. So here angle between the vectors A and B has to be 30 degree. So in this example, if you are asked that what is the angle between A and B, then you have to place tails of both the vectors at the same location, and then there are two gaps for the angles. One gap is less than 180 degree and another gap is there which is greater than 180 degree. So we use the gap which is less than 180. Let's see in case of A and C vector. Suppose for the vector A, and then move the vector C so that its tail matches with the tail of vector A. So here it is vector C. So for vector C, we know that this particular vector makes an angle 70 degrees with the negative x-axis. So when we join tail of both the vectors, then there are two gaps. One gap is this and another gap of angle is this. This particular gap is less than 180 and this particular gap is greater than 180. So angle between the vectors is always referred as the gap, the angle for that gap which is less than 180 degree. So in this case here it is 70 degree, so remaining 110 degree will be the angle between A and C. In the same way, you can find the angle between the vectors B and C. Suppose we draw the vectors B and C keeping their tails at the same location. Just draw the reference x and y. So vector B is here. Here it is, vector B at an angle 60 degree with the y axis. And here is the vector C. This is the vector C which makes an angle 70 degree with the negative x axis. So to know the angle between B and C, there is one gap, this one, which is less than 180, and another gap of angle is here which is greater than 180. But we know that angle between the vectors is always referred as the gap which is less than 180 degrees. So in this case, this particular angle will be used as angle between B and C. So what is this angle? This is 30 degree, 90 degree, and this is 20 degree. So 30, 20, 50 plus 90 it means 140 degree. So 140 is the angle between vector B and C. So that is how we fix or we measure the angle between the two vectors. In the next slide, I have kept several vectors A, B, C and D, and it is just for your practice that you are asked what is the angle between any of the pairs. For example, the vector A is here, which is along x-axis. First, let me draw the reference x-axis and this is y-axis. So vector A is along the x-axis and vector B makes an angle 35 degree with the positive x-axis, and vector C makes an angle 40 degree with negative y-axis, and here D vector makes an angle 45 degree with the negative x-axis. So if you are asked what is the angle between the vectors A and B, then in that case you have to keep tails of both the vectors at the same location. Like here, tail of the vector A is moved at this point, and at the same point tail of the vector B is moved. So it is one gap which is less than 180, and here it is another gap which is greater than 180. So we know that the angle which is less than 180 is used as angle between the vectors. So angle between the vectors A and B is 35 degree in this case. Similarly, for the angle between B and C, place the tail of B and as well as the tail of C at the same location here. So we can find angle between B and C as this angle which is 85 degree, that you can understand on your own, because this is 35 degree, this one is 40 degree. For vector C it is 40 degree, this particular angle is 35 degree. So 40 and this whole particular angle is 90 degree. So here remaining is 50 degree. So total is 85 degree. So angle between B and C is 85 degree. That's it. Similarly, for the angle between C and D, we keep the tails of vectors C and D at the same location, right here, and 40 degree is this angle as per the vector C, and for vector D this particular angle is 45 degree. That means this angle is also 45 degree. So in all, total angle between C and D is 85 degree, because this 85 degree is less than 180 and another gap angle it is greater than 180 that we don't use. And similarly you can find the angle between A and C. A vector, this is C vector, place the C vector and A vector tail at the same location, then you'll get to know that this is 40 degree. So remaining here it is 50 degree. So 50 degree is the angle between vector A and C. And similarly for vector D and A, we have 135 degree, A vector and D vector. A is here, D vector is here. For D vector, this particular angle is 45 degree. So angle between A and D will be 180 minus 45. That means 135 degree. And similarly, angle between B and D can be looked as 170 degree. That's it. That is how we measure the angle between the two vectors. So here I repeat, because this is very important sometimes, how to find the angle between the two vectors. So we have to place tails of both the vectors at the same location. Then there are two possible angles. When we keep two vectors tail at the same location, then there are two possible angles between the two vectors, between these two lines. The one which is less than 180 degree is referred as angle between the vector, so that you should not forget about. So here it is angle between the vector, not this one.